Sup, Brian?
Okay. Hi there, Johnny.
So, Brian of London, and I'm Jonny Versity.
So what's going on? I called you this morning because a friend of mine, let's just try and bash this out. A friend of mine thinks that Israel's going too crazy at the moment, and that he specifically is looking at uh, the number of cases versus the number of serious cases. And we're seeing really low percentages compared to the numbers we first thought were coming out of Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
So much lower critical care than not. You've got the screen. I'm just looking up on my phone for the latest one. It doesn't seem to be overwhelming us in Israel, even though the cases are going up. We've got how many? At the moment, we have the last count. It was 81 serious cases in total, or 82 serious cases so far.
Yeah.
We've had 12 recoveries, and of those, 54 are intubated at the moment. So this is it's a very low percentage. And his point is that Israel's young, relatively fit by world standards, by Western world standards, and we're just not going to get hit so hard, even if we do see a large rise in cases. But I'm still very, very nervous. And overnight they've been showing that there was a big funeral for a rabbi in Bnei Brak, which is a religious part of Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And they were there all congregating. And then today, I've just seen now on Twitter, video of them actually going in and arresting Hasidic Jews, and that's pretty shocking that the government's got its act together to do that.
So
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
First of all, it's really interesting to see all these pox parties all over the place, right? I was actually pretty worried about the elections. So we told our family back there to go as early as humanly possible, because although for some reason it's only now sort of floating out there on the ether waves, it was pretty obvious early on that this thing survives for relatively long periods on surfaces, especially, and we knew that because we know what happened with the previous SARS and various SARS-like coronaviruses, and they're pretty sturdy. I mean, relatively speaking, they're good survivalists in that respect. And we also knew that it can be aerosolized.
Yeah. The election, I've got to say, the election system in Israel is pretty good. I mean, I haven't come across large crowds waiting to vote, and didn't this year. And so you kind of get in, you do your little thing with your little pieces of paper, which are not the world's most transmissible paper. I think is a very poor transmitter of this.
No, not necessarily, no.
Yeah, well, the question is, how many times did we touch our faces, and did we wash our hands enough when we were doing it?
So apparently, like really not long ago, I'm talking about the last couple of days. There have been a bunch of researchers, I think, from the Journal of American Medicine, and they assume, based on whatever data, I didn't read the actual thing, I only got sort of the summation of it, that most of infections actually occur due to droplets, which are, well, it's not an aerosol as in, for instance, tuberculosis, right, which really just floats out there. But the droplets seem to be fine enough to just keep floating up there for up to 3 hours. And again, that is research that we knew before. So this is about 2 weeks old already. We knew that it can have a sustained period of time just hanging in the air. And so, and by the way, the transmissibility transmissibility of this thing, although we are now talking about a reproductive number we need not this one. 1 second. This one. So the transmissibility of this thing seems to be, I think, much, much higher than the assumed numbers at this point. And that means there
was a good Quillette article that was just pointing out that it's this, that R0's not really the greatest thing to focus on, because the damage, as we saw from patient 31 in Korea, can be done by one individual that can completely move the average way.
Well, that's the average
very much, but it will spread thousands of cases that can then descend from that one individual.
Yeah, but again, so the R0 is by definition the average, so it takes into account those super spreaders. And obviously, the more you have these big pox parties, the easier it gets for said super spreaders. People need to understand that R0 is not intrinsic to the virus. Now, there are intrinsic properties that a virus has that can make it that can make it easier for you to contract it, or that make it easier for it to access cells, make it easier for it to transcribe itself, for instance. So obviously, here's the simplest example, right? This is a novel virus. Nobody's immune to it. Therefore, by definition, the R0 is going to be much higher, because it doesn't stop with anyone. There's no one who's immune to it. So if you're exposed to it, depending on the viral load you're exposed to, you will most probably get an infection. And the higher...
This was something on my Twitter feed, a discussion about viral loads and why that matters. And the answer I gave, and perhaps you can double check this, is that if you take in a small amount and you've got a reasonable immune system, your immune system gets to work on it quite quickly before it can establish itself, develops the antibodies. And then if you come across larger and larger amounts, higher viral loads later, you've already done the base work. Whereas if the first thing you see is a vast viral load, it's like a fractal of how the world deals with this virus. You've got a lot of it that comes in all at once, and your system is overloaded. It's just like the hospitals are overloaded. It's the same kind of dynamic, the micro and the macro.
There's a very good indicator for that, and you can see that from the young patients that for some reason get severe symptoms. A lot of them are medical staff, right? And obviously they are exposed to higher viral loads than the average person would. So, and the most obvious example is the Wuhan doctor. So now I want to touch, but you started with, are we being too extreme? So we're now being so extreme because we weren't vigilant enough at the very beginning of this. And believe me, I was not the only one that was screaming about this since January, right? I'm not the only genius out there. And more extreme sort of so if you've read the Imperial College article, and it seems to be the one that most governments at this point, at the very least the UK and American government, but it seems that the Israeli government is taking notes too. It seems that policymakers are really going based on the models that are presented there. Mind you, it's like the Monty Python bit, it's only a model, so you need to take that into account. But still, and they're talking about two strategies. They're talking about suppression and mitigation. And suppression is basically what we're doing now. It's the more extreme measures. It's closure of schools, it's quarantine, it's all that shebang. And mitigation would be so the way they define it is a little differently, and I'll try and define it my own sort of way. So I'm gonna amend their definition, because there are a lot of things about that research that I do not agree. I think that they are just... You mentioned global warming last time. Now, a lot of research into global warming is proper research. I mean, it's good models, only models, but they're good models. The science is solid. We understand the dynamics, the mechanics. A lot of it is based on assumptions, but then it goes into, okay, so what are the conclusions that you are going to draw from it? And are you going to take into account factors like the economy? And unfortunately, it seems that now the doomsayers sort of forgot the economy part, and forgot that actually when the economy crashes, lives are lost when the economy crashes, and it might actually be more lives than what we lose for this virus.
What my friend is pointing out, that Israel has he's come with a number of 126 flu deaths in a typical year, which seems very low, but it comes from a Globes article by the former chief medical officer. But we do have suicides, and we are gonna get a lot more suicides if we tank this economy. It's just inevitable.
Yeah.
And that we could end up with a lot of suicide and a lot of other deaths. That is worrying. I mean, but, I don't want to consign old people to everybody's doing an incredibly tricky balancing act.
Yeah, exactly.
Cost-benefit analysis is always the answer.
It's very hard.
Part of it.
So here are the factors. First of all, trying to do a balance act here, I sort of visualize it like trying to take a balloon full of water and sort of try and hold it in both hands and compress it into a sphere, right? Yeah. Like it's almost an impossible job. And part of the reason is, how many lives are you willing to put on the line? And that is a hard, harsh question to throw into the faces of our leaders. Now, we both understand that, human life does not have a price, but there is an acceptable body count that we can sort of live with.
Yeah.
And I think
the problem with that imperial research, when it first came out, and now he's amended it, but I think actually Breitbart had one of the better articles that didn't say, oh, he's just walked it all back and we're not all going to die. He's changed his expectations based on changing conditions in the UK, especially.
Yeah.
Which is that, even imperfect social distancing and house arrest, like we're living under Israel, it helps.
No. So in the original article already, the model assumes in many cases only 50% and 75% compliance, which, and if people don't know there are many types of Brits, but if you go to an area such as where I live, which is a super conservative, dare I say, very white area, very British. I mean, even the sort of the non-native British people here are still very British, like super British, and they comply.
Yeah.
People keep their distance, and they also acknowledge it. So they acknowledge you if you move away when they're on the same path. You sort of,
everybody says thank you.
You know exactly what I mean.
I know. It's exactly what Israel is mostly not like. Pockets of that here, Mostly only Anglo ones in Renana and
So that's one thing your friend has to take into account. The culture differences manifest in a different rate of transmission. So true, the median age in Israel, and I actually made sure in my fabulous, amazing model.
Which was time dependent R0, which was what that Quillette article was basically saying, which is that you can't, there it is, it's that graph with the blues and the red. It starts off high, but it does go down. And the amount that R0 goes down is based on all of these social distancing measures that the governments can put in place. And if the compliant populace does them, then you can squash this.
Yeah. So then let's say we're talking about the red line, that would be the quarantine effect. So the R, so it's not the R0. The R0 is the basic reproductive number. And then you have the effective reproductive number. And it sort of naturally drops off over time. I'm not talking about the fact that susceptibles are dropping in numbers and therefore the curve itself sort of tapers off of the amount of people infected. So the virus itself has less people. That's another factor,
which is, there are less people to now infect because you've already infected.
So that would be simply the tapering off of the graph itself. So if I go to, the model cumulative, the fact that it sort of, suddenly stops here, it's because there are no more people to infect in a way. Yeah. Or not enough people, and that's herd immunity, right? So there is an amount beyond which you will encounter, let's say that 3 out of 4 people are immune and you come into contact with 4 people, you will only infect 1, maybe, and therefore R0 will drop below 1 and that's it. But there are other factors that influence R0. For instance, let's say that the government wouldn't have done anything. Believe me, when people start seeing the numbers coming out of Italy, they start taking it seriously. And there are certain measures that people take sort of naturally, right? So it might not drop the reproductive number drastically, but it sort of drops off over time. And also, we're heading towards summer, so we know that the virus does less well on surfaces. I think it's pretty obvious now that it does survive. I actually made just to make sure that people don't think that summer will save them. In my Hebrew podcast that I do, let's go. I actually spoke about it, and people sort of assume, we'll be fine because we'll get out of it because it's summer and it's hot and stuff like that. So what I did is I took the weather map. Right, let's go and open the weather map. And we can see the nice weather, and it's pretty obvious that it's summer in the southern hemisphere, and it's winter in the northern hemisphere, right? Okay. And indeed, when we looked at the original maps from... Let's go to, where is it? I think it's this one or this one. I'm not sure. So this is the Johns Hopkins site.
This infamous heat map thing.
Yeah. So here we'll just see, where are most cases clustering around, and it's pretty obvious. Yeah, they're clustering around the northern hemisphere. And that's what made many people, including myself at the beginning, say, well, we might be at luck here. But then we started seeing the numbers grow. And suddenly I figured, well, I'm looking at all the places on the map, and I say, well, I used to fly a lot for business. And I'm saying, oh, wait, I've been to all these places because that's where all the business is at.
Yeah.
So I went and I looked at a different map, and that's the map that takes flights from various points to points. So if I'll go and I'll look at, let's do Guangzhou. You know what? It's that's a pretty major, and it's relatively close to Hubei. And we have here, for instance, okay, it's not clear enough. Let's pick something that has a lot of flights out of it. So let's go again to Ken. That's one. And we need, okay, Beijing. How do you write Beijing? Oh yeah, okay. So let's just look here. Let's first of all have one in JFK, and let's have the other one in. I want something that has a lot of flights so we can see nice big lines coming out of it. So not Tokyo. Oh, here, Beijing. Okay, so now we'll have nice big lines, and let's do only the routes. And suddenly you see now, here is a nice correlation. You see just the amount of flights, right, going out of China into the US, and where? To exactly where we see the big outbreaks, right? The East Coast, the West Coast, the large cities, which is pretty obvious. Where do most of the flights go into Europe? Well, look at how many of them actually land in the area of Italy and obviously in Western and Northern Europe. And now,
Spain was very much involved with the whole Belt and Road.
But look how few you have into Africa, Southern America, even from the US, but especially from China, you see almost none. And now, if you take this map and compare it to the amount of people infected and where they are infected, this is actually a much better match than this.
Yeah.
So,
but also, Africa is a big black hole. I mean, the let's not worry so much side would say Africa is very young. I think average age 18 or something.
Yeah, that's right.
For the entire continent, which is just, mind blowing. Actually, I don't think we can fully comprehend how young Africa is. Yeah. And also they don't have access to healthcare like we do. So when they get sick,
and that's why they're so young. One of the reasons why they're so young.
They're dying young anyway.
Exactly.
There isn't the old population to get this and to get really sick. The young ones that get it most of them will be largely okay, and they'll just grin and bear it through on their own. They won't, there won't be any consequences that we'll notice, and there won't be mass testing, and they won't see antibodies. Now, the one thing that is going the opposite direction, especially in South Africa, is so many of them have got AIDS, and the interaction of this with HIV. But that
it's
might
the ultimate comorbidity. It's like,
well, is it? Because if you're already, maybe those drugs that they're taking are going to whack this thing on the head. We just again,
I'm not sure how many of them are actually have access to the HIV treatment protocol, right? The cocktail is expensive. I mean, seriously expensive.
This is again. The problem is we are so unserved by a media that's just hysterical about Trump and America and ventilators and stuff. I'd love to know details like what proportion of South Africa's HIV. Look, if they're HIV positive, they must be on the cocktail of drugs. Otherwise, they'd be dropping dead from that, right?
Well, they do. They drop dead.
Oh, okay. I,
And not necessarily in South Africa, but yeah, they do drop dead.
yeah.
You want? I mean, how do I know? Well, there are, and this is horrific, but we know the stories of people that rape babies. I mean, literally babies.
Yes.
Because they think it will cure their AIDS. You don't do that if you're on the cocktail.
No.
Obviously, you don't do that if you're a. Oh, never mind. I don't want to go. But you understand. So and again, it's a very expensive treatment. It's much cheaper than it used to be, but it's still very expensive. And actually, in the model, I ask people to take into account the age. So when you select the country at the top left here, you can actually see if I'll go with, for instance, Israel, right?
Yeah.
Then let's see. The median age around the world is 30, around 30. Mm-hmm. And the median age in Israel is 29.7. And if I'll go to Italy...
Yeah, it's in the 50s, isn't it?
It's 45, the median. 40. So people need to remember median means that half the people are over 45, right? So, yeah, they're very... I mean, the UK is about 40... and we will see the effect of age, but there are also other factors. So Italy, like Israel, very, let's say, warm people. They touch each other a lot. They we talked briefly about your private space, right? So there is no such thing. They talk straight into your face. And in Britain, on the other hand, social distancing is sort of built into the culture in many respects, right? Yeah. So there are cultural differences. And again, when you come and assess, how is my country responding to this? That's one of the things that you need to factor in. Does your country have a very good healthcare system? Yes, no. Does it have a proper manufacturing sector? Because if we're going into a wartime economy, and that's where we're going, which is good, people need to understand that that's okay. It's good to have a wartime economy now because it keeps the economy afloat in a way. And unlike in wars, there is no decimation of infrastructure. So we're going to bounce back pretty quickly after this. So first of all, I know that you're probably feeling the pain. We certainly are. And a lot of people will lose their jobs. And this will have true repercussions. I ask people to be psychologically prepared for seeing large amounts of dead, and I still say so now. Okay, if you think now you're seeing a lot of deaths, look at Italy. That is where we're heading.
Yeah.
But you also need to be prepared to have economic hardships. And
that is this balancing act, because we're definitely. I mean, we can see it especially with Trump. He's obviously heavily torn between the economic hardship, but he knows that he's got to squash these hotspots. But the American system is it's poorly understood, I think, by people outside, which is that the federal government really isn't in charge on the local level, and it shouldn't be. And it's only under extreme circumstances that Trump wields any local power. He shouldn't. And so that's all the federal government is there to do, is to give whatever it can to states when they ask for it. But this idea, that they can lock down New York, for example, and stop people going in and out, that is so antithetical to the thought process of the vast
to an
majority.
American. Oh, dude.
Yeah, I mean, we Israelis seem to be, we've got the secular part of the secular Jewish community seems to be taking, with annoyance, we're following the rules. The Haredi are ignoring the rules. The Arabs are ignoring the rules.
Yeah. And when we saw it in the measles outbreak too, and yeah, we saw the numbers.
Yeah. No, I mean it's.
So what
we're too harsh in Israel right now.
So here's the thing. Here's what people need to understand. So this initial phase, if it would have been put in place much earlier, then we wouldn't have had shit. We wouldn't have had to go as far as we did. Now, what we're doing now, we basically what everybody's doing now is buying time. Okay. So you go into extreme suppression. It's not because we're going to beat the virus that way. That's not how these things work, right? If they would have, we wouldn't have. Look at outbreaks in antiquity. So smallpox and the Black Plague, they all had harsh, extreme quarantine put in place. In fact, the word quarantine it comes from the 40 days of quarantine that cities used to be put under and that ships coming from abroad used to be put under.
They had to wait to see if anybody was carrying this thing before.
Yeah. So they knew, just let them fester for 40 days. If there's anything there, they're going to die from it. And so they're going to have a little cruise ship there, right? A little Diamond Princess happening. So, and if these extreme measures, and people can go back to the stories from Florence and all those places of entire cities being locked down and with the army put in place, and if someone tries to leave, they're killed. But it obviously didn't work. There's still an outbreak. So what are we doing now? We're putting all these super extreme, unbelievable measures in place to buy us time. And in this time, we're going into wartime economy, which means we're going to leverage all the manufacturing power that we have in our own countries, which is why it's so important for countries to have said manufacturing powers, which is something that I think will be positive in the eventual outcome. Countries will understand we cannot decimate. We cannot just let our manufacturing jobs sort of evaporate into China or Vietnam or wherever. Now, so what we're doing now is getting the system prepared. We're getting treatment centers, which are not necessarily full-blown hospitals, but they are capable of giving care, essentially acting as quarantine centers in a way. If you're sick, you come in, you stay there, you're being treated, making sure that you don't get complications, which brings us to the next part, the complications. We're trying to find a proper treatment, something that will work fast, and hopefully will work before you get complicated. So we want something that once you got the virus, we can give it to you, and it will suppress the virus fast enough for you not to be complicated, and for you to develop your own immunity, and for you to go back to work. So, but we don't have that yet. Once we do, we also need the time to actually make those drugs, right? They're not just, if I want to make...
And they have to be simple enough to deliver without heart complications and monitoring. Because, I mean, all of the talk about chloroquine and azithromycin, which I've seen, it may well help some patients, but it does seem you need very, very careful monitoring of the
That's
patient because
exactly,
of all sorts
exactly.
cross correlations, and you've got to check heart
Which,
medicines and are they on lipids, and
but so,
it's
and
not something you can just hand out pills and everybody's better.
it's perfect that you said that, because my next point is what we want is something with low toxicity, because what you hear now from people, and that's again, that goes now to the okay, everyone that has those people, the world will never be the same. Okay, yeah, the world will be the same. And people say, it's gonna take 18 months at least. Yeah, the economy, if you want to throw the economy back to the Stone Age, then yeah, let this thing keep on for 18 months. Plus, remember that people are people, right? I will not, even me, I will not stay at home for 18 months. There is a point where I will break, and I have kids at home, which is even worse. So, point is, if we find a treatment that has low enough toxicity, people say 18 months because that's the assumption of when we'll have a vaccine. Well, a low toxicity treatment is in fact a vaccine-like in its effect, because I can actually give it, for instance, to medical workers, to people at the hospital, as a preventative drug.
Yeah. And then you don't even know if they catch it except by doing antibody tests. But it's academic then.
And now, which it's beautiful. You keep giving me these segues. And the last thing that we want to, the last thing we're trying to do in this period that we're buying ourselves this time of not being overwhelmed by deaths and by complicated and by serious people who need to go on ventilators, the last thing is the testing bit. Now, why is the testing bit so important? Because once we start going back into normality, and my current assumption is around 2 months of this sort of quarantine, and slowly, gradually, within a month, sort of opening the gates again. In the UK.
Maybe sooner in Israel.
Sooner in Israel for sure, because Israel started all the measures sooner, and also there are, well, I'll get to that because it's related to the tests. So that is the suppression part. Now, if you have all the systems put in place, you know that you can handle the amount of sick, right? So your healthcare system won't be overwhelmed, will be capable to, and you need to know, okay, I need around 10,000 beds. I need 500 more ventilators, whatever. And you come up with the numbers. And based on the numbers that you get at the end of those, let's say 2 months, you say, okay, now I'm going to start testing people in 2 ways. First of all, random. So just random tests. And hopefully we'll have antibody tests, because antibody tests will help us at least understand how prevalent it was in society to begin with, right?
Which will also help us dramatically learn this mortality and morbidity rate, because that's the big unknown that we don't. Circling back to the thing I said first. Look, we know everything out of China is nonsense. Okay, I think we're both agreed with that. It's like China, everything is a lie. You showed in one of your videos, which was very compelling, that their figures fit your model so unbelievably accurately that the almost only explanation is that they took a model like yours and said, and this is how many cases we have today, this is how many we've got tomorrow, and this is how many we've got the day after, and it's going to tail off here. And they made that decision.
And even worse, it's a polynomial instead of an exponential, which essentially is like breaking the laws of nature. Like, you don't have polynomial population growths. It
And I think
Doesn't work.
I'm confident that there is no way on earth that out of the 1.5 billion or more people that are in China, they have fewer deaths
than Italy.
It's just
right.
unthinkable.
In ground zero of this virus.
Yeah. When they didn't do anything about it for a month and a half, or they actually actively killed or suppressed those who tried to raise the alarm.
It's
unthinkable
sure.
that they didn't reach.
Listen, did you see the last images coming out of China from the crematoriums, the lines?
Yeah.
And
I don't know. I don't know what the number is. I don't know if it's sort of biblical or not, but it isn't 3,500 or whatever.
No, if it would have been biblical, then the regime would have fallen already because people would have revolted. And by the way, we're starting to see signs of unrest in China. And I would say to all those who believe in a conspiracy theory that the Chinese somehow are behind it, the Chinese have more to lose than most countries. So authoritarian regimes rely on the fact that, like the Chinese ones, I'm not talking about North Korea, right, where it's complete suppression of the populace. There's sort of this, if you've ever been to China, and I've been to China, and
I was there once for the Canton Fair in Guangzhou. About 5-6 years ago, and again, I had no idea what China was until I went there, and then the scale we have lots of buildings going up in Israel, but then you get to Israel and you find a single building that is a whole, the whole of the town I live in will fit in that one building, and there are 12 of them.
Yeah. So when you speak to Chinese, they don't speak about politics usually, unless you're speaking to someone who's pretty high up in a company, okay, and they feel a little freer to speak. And there is a silent agreement between the citizens in China and the Chinese Communist Party, and that is, we'll give you a good life, you shut up. Okay?
Shut up, slave.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay? And we'll give you a good life, and you'll have all the shit that Americans get. That's it, basically. You'll have a big flat TV, and I don't know, and even a nice car. And people need to understand, China 10 years ago, China today, it's just a different place. Now,
I mean, I was being driven, I was being driven around in a S-Class hybrid that I hadn't actually even seen in Israel at the time. That was 6 years ago. I don't think that car had made it to Israel by the time I was being driven in it.
Quite possibly. Now, also something else that they're doing, if the entire economies of the US and Europe are being shut down, they're essentially shutting down their clientele, right? If you wanna take over, I heard one of the conspiracy theories is they're gonna take over world economy. Well, you don't do that by killing your clients, okay? Nor by stealing their money, right? If they don't have money to pay you, your economy will suffer. So it's not from the Chinese. Please, people, give it a rest, right? Never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity. Or I think I'm sort of, you get the gist, right?
Yeah.
So, again, what we're trying to do now, and people have to understand, this is not going to be sustained forever. Even if some scientists say it will, they're wrong, because it only takes into account, much like global warming, where people forget that, you know what, maybe investing in technology will do a better job than sucking money out of the economy and imposing various regulations. And I think that global warming is real. And yes, I think that a lot of it has to do with human activity. It's hard to tell how much. It's really hard to tell. And an honest climate scientist will tell you just that. And when they do projections into the future, you suddenly hear anything between 30 and 100 years. And it's like, well, there's a reason.
And listen, no, that's been my line. My entire thing is that it's hubris. it is unbelievable arrogance to say that science can tell us. It is just not within the scope. You might be the lucky one that comes up with the right number, but it isn't because of science. There is we don't have the knowledge of the system. We don't have the calculation power. We cannot do the maths to know the climate in 150 years. But we can do
a good trajectory. We understand the dynamics well enough to say between 30 and 100 years from now, we're going to see certain effects. But then the question is,
that's where it gets completely impossible as far as I'm concerned.
The problem is that then suddenly the same people who make the projections suddenly tell you, well, obviously the only way to do it now is to cut emissions to zero within a year.
Zero.
Well, you won't do that.
And destroy.
So, and I see something very similar now happening with this, and we need to make sure that I keep hearing, we need to make sure that we also factor in human nature and the economy. Okay. And these are things that I see also lacking in the global warming alarmists, let's say. Again, I think it's serious. And by the way, I think that global warming will cause us, we will see more and more emergent viruses because of that, because animals are driven off their natural habitats. They come into contact with humans more. It's just a fact. We're seeing it. We know it's true. I mean, it just happens. Now, that is the price of progress, and we need to be willing to pay the price of progress. And humans have been willing to pay the price of progress throughout most of history, because we work under the assumption that we're more important than most things, which I agree with. I mean, I'm okay with killing cows for humans, because humans are more important than cows as far as I'm concerned. So, going back to what's going to happen next. The idea behind this testing thing is that then we can go down the Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore route, which is that surgical quarantine measures that you put in place. You find a case, you do, and now I'm not talking about the laughable case, case tracing that they did here in the UK. I'm talking, yes, employ Orwellian measures like they're now doing in Israel, like they did from day one in Singapore, but then again, they're not a democracy, so okay. And remember that South Korea said, listen, we're going to take now special emergency times powers, and we're going to do stuff like trace your mobile phone, and if you've been near someone infected, you're going to get a text message, stay the fuck home. Right?
Actually, my wife's friend this morning sent us the screenshot of her contact tracing app, the Hamagan one that I've got on my phone, but which, since I installed it, I've been to one supermarket, I've walked around my neighborhood, and now I'm even more restricted. I can only walk around my building. So, But,
so the thing is that, but when you do that, so we have enough tests so we can do proper contact tracing. We employ all the technologies that we have, and unfortunately all countries have the technology, the technological ability to track all their citizens at all times, anywhere. If we employ all those for a limited amount of time, right? Let's not go 9/11 and just forgo all our privacy and everything, but still,
and drones following us if we stray too far from our building. And, I mean, Israel's gone completely. It feels completely crazy. But
fine, but if you do it, first of all, obviously it has to be limited because you don't want your governments to be to go Orwellian. Yeah, we do, because my wife is also sending me messages. So if we do that, however, we can manage this over a prolonged time, let's say a year, until indeed we have a vaccination, without completely destroying the economy.
yeah, I hope so.
I truly believe, and I think that is the exit strategy, because the alternative that they offer in their paper, the Imperial College, is they say we're going to trigger this suppression on off all the way until we reach a vaccination. That will not work.
Yeah,
it won't fly.
Yeah.
So, and I think that we're seeing that governments are more in line with my plan, which is get ready for it and then go into the Korean path. And I invite people to go to Worldometer and look at the graph that Korea has, and it starts exponential, it shoots up, and now it's linear. So it increases, it doesn't drop, and it doesn't flat like in China, which is science fiction. It increases, but linearly.
Yeah.
Meaning that you keep everything under control. You're going to have not herd immunity, but you're going to have a nice chunk of people already immune to it, and that's already good by the time you have a vaccination. If we do that for about a year and a half, we're going to be good. We have to start with about 2 months of this shit. People have to be ready, have to be prepared, but understand that it's either that or see tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more, 7 digits, 8 digits of people dying of this, or take it 2 months, let our governments get ready for this, those who will, those who can. They'll start easing measures off. This will stay with us. We will have social distancing for a while. Sectors of the economy that have to do with not anything that has to do with flights and tourism and all that, they will suffer, and governments will need to come and help them out. We cannot let them go under, tits up. And that's it. That's my prediction at this point. My prediction / hope.
I think we should end it there and wrap it up.
So hopefully you send it to your friend and explain to him why we're doing it, why we need it at this point, and tell him, don't worry. Eventually.
Well, I might have a chat with him at some point, so we'll see.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, Johnny.
That's been
this will be on both our channels later.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Brian.
Bye.
Sorry for blabbering for so long, but I wanted to get the points across so people can relax. Peace.